Welcome back, everybody. Fixed Ops Mastermind podcast. Excited to have with us our guest, Tom Kline, today. Tom, thank you for joining us.
Dave, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. We've been excited for this one. For those that don't know you, would you give a little brief introduction of yourself and tell us what your first car was?
Yes, so that's a great question. Both are good questions. So I'm a third generation car guy. My family's been in the car business since 1925, which means we've been in the business almost 100 years, which is a long time.
Yes, it is.
Long time. And I was a dealership owner for 30 years, franchise dealership owner. And we sold the dealerships in 2019. And that's when I started my consulting business. And I help dealers with avoid people who want to reach into their pocket and take money out of their pocket. That's what I do.
There's lots of those.
Yes. And my first car that I've owned, I bought last October because I had a demo for my whole life. But my very first car that I used for a date was a bright red Monza Spider with a big spider on the front, which was the ugliest, most embarrassing thing I've ever driven in my life. And that's what I used for my first date when I was like 16, when I said, Dad, can I, use a car? So I don't think that qualifies as my first car, but I bought my first car in October of 2021. And that's a Mitsubishi Outlander, a plug-in electric hybrid vehicle. So the government graced me with an additional $6,500 of rebate.
Yeah.
And it's a fabulous vehicle. It's quiet and it's comfortable. So I was
Nice.
56 when I bought my first vehicle.
That is not an answer I expected. I was actually looking online at that exact vehicle last night, because it's come into my head that I'm seeing a lot of Mitsubishis on the road now, which seems so odd. They had just about disappeared. So
Right.
So 1925, the dealership that I was first a service advisor at was founded in 1923. So they're coming up on 100 years next year, and there's not a lot of those around in this country, that's for sure.
That's right. That is
or
right.
this
Dave.
country, anywhere in the world.
Right.
That is very interesting, and I did not expect that your first car would be 2021. So
well, I mean, if we're gonna get really technical about it, during the pandemic, my wife and I bought a Winnebago, which I actually bought before my car. We sold it. We sold the Winnebago because we made money on it. We drove it for 10,000 miles and made money on it, which is nuts. But so I don't know if that qualifies as my first car or not, but that's what we did.
Yeah, the pandemic helped you make money on that, right?
It did.
I have a 14 Jeep Wrangler that my son is about to be 16, and I've said for the last 5 years, like, when you get your license, I'll give you this car. I'll drive it until then, and I'll give you this. And now I'm going, man, this thing's worth more than what I paid for it. I don't want to give it to you.
Right.
It's crazy.
It is.
So in your current consulting role right now, you are, as you said, helping dealers keep people out of their pockets. And we all know there's a lot of people trying to get in dealers' pockets, some with some very, very valuable stuff that they're bringing, and others not so much. Tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. So I'm a risk mitigation consultant, which means that I will go through the entire operation. I'll audit the entire operation. My checklist is actually, which I've developed over my many years, it's like 24 pages long. I mean, you can't get through it. It's that, I mean, and so through continuous improvement activity, we looked at the most vulnerable places in the business first, making sure that we plug any holes through risk transference. And risk transference takes on one of two different roles. Number one, can we buy an insurance policy that, or negotiate for an insurance policy that would cover that peril if somebody makes a claim against the dealership. So that's number one. And then number two, can we put in policies and install procedures to stop problems before they happen? So my whole role is to stop problems before they happen. And one good example, if I may, is how dealers are handling their online reviews. And most dealers kind of give it lip service, and they'll post something that says, "Hey, I'm sorry, this was a problem. If let us know if we can do anything for you in the future," right? Which is not addressing the issue.
No.
The way to address that is you actually have to bring the customer in, solve their problem, and then ask them to, and I use the word specifically, update their review, not change it. If you ask them to change it, they feel manipulated. Yes. And they feel like you don't care. But that's one example where, first of all, that's where class actions start. Is back in the old days before the internet, I know of a class action that started with two ladies in church, and one lady said, "Did you get screwed by the dealership? Did you get screwed by it?" And so they joined together, and that cost the dealer close to 10 million. And this was back in, I guess, in the 90s.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, so online complaints, both for employees, Dave, as well as customers, right? Because you have Glassdoor, of which a lot of dealers don't know about Glassdoor. And Glassdoor, especially with what Quantum 5 does, Glassdoor is a really important thing that dealers should pay attention to, which is what their employees are saying. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's something that has really started to finally come into focus, right? Is for forever, especially once the internet and reviews came around, there was so much focus on what the customer was saying that we kind of forgot about what our employees were telling us, which many times if we listened to what the employees were saying, it was a leading metric to what your customers were going to be saying down the road, right?
That's true. And what I have found in dealerships, Dave, is problems at dealerships start on two legs. They start either from customers or employees. And I'll give you a recent example. And one of the things that I absolutely advocate as a loss prevention mechanism is exit interviews. Dealerships rarely use exit interviews, and they are so helpful in rooting out problems and helping you discover what will help you run your operation better. Yeah. And I have a client who didn't want to do exit interviews, and a parts department employee quit and went to OSHA because he claimed that the working conditions were unsafe, and he cited a piece of cable in the rafters. Well, it turned out that the piece of cable in the rafters was a piece of Cat5 cabling, which, as you know, is the plug that goes in the back of your computer. It's not electrical at all. So, so in the meantime, they're arguing. This dealership is arguing with OSHA over a problem that could have been stopped with somebody either taking cutters and just cutting it and stuffing it back in the wall, or feeding it 5 minutes it would have taken to prevent this problem. And now the dealership's got lawyers' fees and the whole thing. And that could have been prevented if somebody just sat down with the guys, said, "Why are you leaving? Is there anything we can do?" And especially when everybody's trying to retain talent now, right, it's even more important.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you? I'll assume your answer on this is going to be yes, but do you see value in using not just the exit interview, but actually maintaining that conversation before we get to the point where the employee is
of course, but that is a top-down structural issue that the dealer has to instill into the managers to make sure that there's a culture of value and caring that is throughout the organization, so that the managers are taking care of their employees.
Yeah, I think probably sometimes that is there's too much of an assumption there is what I'm trying to say.
Right. I think it's overlooked. I think lip service is paid to it a lot. I don't
Mhm.
think a lot of employees at dealerships feel like the dealership is invested in them because
Yeah.
there's little training going on, right? A little
Right.
bit of training for your employees where they feel empowered,
Mhm.
whether it's job specific or maybe it's motivational or a combination. I think goes a long way for employees to really feel valued.
Right, right. And that's at Quantum 5, what we're trying, obviously we're doing the upfront training on people skills, number one.
Right.
But also the continuing education, the sustainment of that education, and that being the real reason behind it, right? You want your team to be empowered. You want them to feel empowered, not just use the empowerment word because it's cool right now, but actually give them true empowerment. And you want to continue investing in them, right? We're expecting our teams to invest in our customers daily. We need to invest in them to give them that energy, right? Like your plug-in hybrid is it's gotta have that energy source somewhere to keep you going. And our teams need that same thing.
No question. No question about that. It's very important. And it's that alone is, from my lens, is a loss prevention issue, right? You keep your employees happy. They don't go to the EEOC and complain about you. Right. And then you've got lawyers' bills and insurance claims and discrimination and all that negativity and all the time it takes to deal with it.
Right. And many times those can be prevented with some very simple conversations, right? I mean, a lot of times the word baseless isn't the right word, but a lot of times it's a misunderstanding thing that's happening. It's not something that's egregious that's happening or intentional that an employer is doing. It's because there was a lack of communication that you end up with the EEOC or OSHA, which whether there's something going on or not going on is not going to be fun to be involved with.
Well, OSHA is going to find something because they're going to find something.
Right.
I mean, that's number one. But number two, I mean, one really great risk mitigation technique that I suggest to dealers is using your employee guidebook as a start on how to communicate with your employees. So if for example, there should be an agreement in the back of the guidebook that says, something like this is kind of crude words, but I agree to go see the dealer before I file a lawsuit or go to the EEOC, because we do value our employees. The dealer wants to know and get the feedback. And so that prevents miscommunication, as you said, prevents problems, and gives the employee a way to go, right? Because if you're an employee who's 4 levels down from the dealer, you feel like you don't know which way to go if your manager's the problem, as an example.
And I think too often that employee handbook is all about what not to do. Right. It's all about what you shouldn't do and what's going to happen to you if you do something wrong, as opposed to the what should we do? How do we get there? Right. Your GPS doesn't tell you don't turn left here. Right. It tells you to turn left here if that's where you're supposed to go. And that's a better way for us to get somewhere is to show them the path of how we get there, what I'm going to invest and what I expect you to invest back into that relationship.
Right. And then one small clarification, this is something that I preach, which is I like to call it a guidebook instead of a handbook. Because a guidebook guides you. It's not necessarily all inclusive. And there's some connotations that a handbook, that everything's included right there. And if it's not written there, then it's not a policy.
Yes.
And employees love to say, well, it's not in the handbook, right? And so therefore I don't have to comply or I don't have to do whatever. And so that's a small nuance, but again, it's a cultural thing, right? It's how you want to communicate with your employees.
Yeah, and if you've built that culture and you have a strong culture there, then that's all you need is a guidebook, right? You just need a still structured, but a set of guides where where we know where we have to go, those little blow up things they use for kids on the side of bowling alleys, right? To just,
Right.
you
Gutter
can kind of
guards.
bump against them. Yeah.
They're gutter guards, and that's
Yeah.
what I am. I'm the gutter guard. I mean, that's what I do.
just little touches to keep you back in the center of the lane. That's all.
Some are little and some are not so little. I talked to a dealer 2 weeks ago who said, well, what do you do? And I explained what I did, and he came back and he said, so you give me a colonoscopy? I said, well, you can look at it like that. I said, you need to get a colonoscopy, but you need it more than every 5 years if you're going to use me. I mean, this is not an every 5-year thing. I mean, this is a monthly thing, and you know, you should have continuous improvement activity. But if it makes you happy to call it a colonoscopy,
yeah,
good with me.
Yeah, and it may not be pleasant, but it's going to keep you healthy. So
exactly,
it's going to find your problems before they're big problems, and that's
it.
Yeah,
that's it, and that's the key to making sure that you keep the money you make, which is what I obviously advocate.
Right. So with compliance of things, obviously there's some things that are top of mind with compliance, tax compliance, that type of thing that everybody I think is thinking, oh, I got to make sure that I'm on the straight and narrow about that stuff. But what are some of the other issues that you see that maybe were not even on somebody's horizon at all? Like I had no idea I had to pay attention to that.
Yeah. So there's some oldies but goodies, and I'll come back to them second, because I think right now what's important is the new regulations that came out on the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, which is the safeguards rule, and dealers are required to comply by December 9th of 2022. And this is it's a huge undertaking, unfortunately. But that's the way the regulations are written. The NADA did a survey, or a study rather, and said that it's going to cost the dealer $279,000 a year to comply with this rule.
Wow.
Which is a mind-boggling amount. I think that's a very high estimate. I think that was the lobbying answer, which I appreciate on behalf of the dealers. You know, the more it sounds, the more leverage they can have. So I appreciate that. I don't think it's quite that severe, but this isn't something that you can just flip a switch, and there's no one technology solution that I've seen that will answer everything. There's some very analog type things that need to be done. And then there's a lot to be able to safeguard. And this is all about safeguarding customers' information, because there have been so many data breaches, right? I mean, I don't know how many free offers of credit monitoring that I've gotten in the past 2 years, but it's been a lot. And so the FTC finally said, enough. Enough. And so that's a big one. Secondly, the second biggest one was news from last week, where there was a dealer group who the FTC fined $10 million for sketchy business practices. And the way I read the release from the FTC was they deserved to fail because they didn't have a compliance program in place. They didn't have any monitoring in place. They didn't have any checks and balances in place. And so as a result, they did bad things to consumers, and the FTC fined them $10 million.
Yeah. So on something like that. So I mean, obviously there's some bad operators in every industry, right? That
absolutely
that give that industry the black eye that it gets sometimes.
Right.
But there's also times where, like we started out on this path, was that they don't realize that they have to do this. Or another thing we talked about, that it's got to start from top down, and that top is assuming that the people they have in place know this stuff.
Right.
And sometimes they just don't know it by negligence. Sometimes they don't know it because they just don't know it. They have no idea that it exists and that it's something that they need to have their eye on.
Right. Absolutely. And that's where a guy like me comes in, of course, because I come in and I'll say, look, here are the biggest problems that I see with dealerships. And I'll give you a good example. As I mentioned oldies but goodies before. The IRS 8300 cash reporting form is an oldie but goodie because dealers think that their accounting department has it. Like, I got it, no problem. And most dealerships don't have it. And they don't have the right mechanisms in place. And the problem with non-compliance is that there's jail time involved through the IRS, right? If you're not compliant with the IRS, I think it's up to 5 years of jail and 5.5 million in fines. Now, I haven't seen or read anything that they've done that recently, but it's out there. And part of Section 8 of the Criminal Code, which is very interesting, which is the criminal code where it shows sentencing guidelines for individuals who are involved in crimes. One of the mitigating aspects is, do you have a compliance program and does it check? And as a corporation and as an organization, it will keep you, between the gutters, and it'll keep you out of jail, because I know dealers don't like orange, generally speaking.
Right. that is true. That's an interesting thing, and certainly those three letters strike fear into everybody's heart. That IRS, right? That's
right.
It feels like they've taken down more criminals than the justice system has, right? When nobody else could catch them.
Al Capone, right?
Right, there you go. Yeah, it's taxes that got them. You don't run everybody but the IRS.
That's it. That's
it. The interesting thing to me is that there's so much information out there that sometimes the information is overwhelming. But a lot of times we just don't know where to look for it, right? For anybody who has tried to start a small business, you would think there was somewhere where you could go where there was a guidebook that would say, okay, you need to do this, you need to have this X, Y, Z, right? And you could follow all these steps, and that doesn't exist anywhere. No. Right? There's nowhere that you can go that you can just find everything you need to even start a little, grandma starting a business selling shawls she's knitting.
Right.
Right. There's nowhere that grandma can go that she can find all the stuff that she has to do to make that business legal and to comply. And that gets way larger when you start getting into dealerships.
Absolutely.
Even the smallest of dealerships are dealing with a large amount of money transacting, a lot of compliance with OSHA and things. Where's the best place for people to start to try and figure out what they're missing, where their holes are?
Yeah, it's a great question, Dave. I think I'll give you an example. The trade groups, so the NADA is a great resource for that. One example, so where I see problems start more often than not, as I mentioned before, are the two-legged problems, which are customers and employees. If you can get rid of those two-legged problems, you're going to save 70% of your problems. The next 10% of problems come from advertising problems. Some are on purpose and some are inadvertent. And like the NADA has a guide to dealership advertising, and it's that they provide for, I think, for free. It's 90 odd pages long, and it's very involved because the advertising laws are so complicated. So, for dealers with compliance and with advertising and that whole thing, NADA is a great resource. Some dealerships, as you know, Dave, go to 20 groups. Those are often a good resource for them in terms of compliance. And I would say those are probably the two best places to start.
Okay, so on the 20 group side of that, is that is that from information they would get from like an NADA or an NCM that's providing the 20 group, or is this information they're getting from their peers within that 20 group, which could present its own problem?
I think both. I think both. I mean, compliance, in my experience, is not, everybody would rather talk about the new marketing widget, of which is, fun and exciting, instead of colonoscopies. It's just, it's just different. But you really have to, if you seek out that information, I think it's pretty readily available. I don't think, in my experience, I don't see dealers spending a whole lot of time on this, because they think it can't happen to me, or it's not going to happen. Or, as one dealer that I know says, it's a case of the yets, which is, it hasn't been a problem yet.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to worry about it until it is a problem. And that's certainly one way to think about your risk, right? I'm just not going to do anything until it's a problem. And that's certainly an approach, but it's not an approach that I am comfortable with. And I mean, as another good example is a lot of dealerships I go into, one of the very first things I ask, I said, sometimes I'll ask, depending on the relationship I have with the dealer, I'll say, I want you to do a little math calculation in your head. Take your land and building, add it to your parts inventory, plus your used car inventory, and then how much is your blue sky? Add that to that number. And then tell me what that number is, or you don't have to tell me. And generally that number, even for a small dealership, generally that number is in excess of 10 million, right? Even if you're a country dealership, right, you've got land and building and parts and car. I mean, it's just hard. These days it's hard.
Right.
And so then I say, now let's go to your insurance policy and let's look at your umbrella. How much is your umbrella? And they say, why is that important? And I say, well, if your parts driver hits a school bus full of kids, which is the worst case scenario, how much coverage are you going to have? And the last, one client I have, I did this mathematical calculation. Land, building, blue sky exceeded 25 million. He had 6 million of insurance.
Oh, that's a problem.
It's a problem, right? That's a real problem. And when I explained that if they have a catastrophic accident, that whoever they have that accident with is going to own your business because you don't have enough insurance, they all of a sudden go, oh my God, now I understand why this is important.
Yeah. Yeah. It was when I was running stores, and obviously I'm on the fixed ops side of things. It was an argument I would often have with used car managers and GMs when there was something that they didn't want to do on a used car, whether that was a used car that was going to be in our inventory or one somebody had recently purchased and then came back in with an issue that was some sort of a safety issue. And it was a, for whatever reason that they didn't want to do it. And, and I would always say, hey, I really like working for X Nissan, whatever the owner's name was. And I said, I really don't want to be working for Mr. Customer Nissan.
Right. Exactly.
because of your decision, that's what's going to end up happening at some point. Because like you said, it's a case of the yets, but I don't want to be the guy who's the case of the example.
Exactly. And that's a great example, Dave, of why culture is part of risk mitigation. Because if the culture in that store had been fix customer cars, fix customer problems, we're not going to get into arguments over that, even if they bought it as is, have a certain procedure for how much they should spend. If it doesn't go to some other supervisors to approve it or handle it, whatever it is. But that's where lawsuits start. That's where regulatory problems start, right? That's where customers go to the FTC and say, this dealership sold me an unsafe car. I mean, I read a lawyer letter this morning about from a dealership who sent it to me and wants help trying to resolve it, because that's one of the things I do. And there's a hole in the frame, apparently. Now this dealer says that the hole wasn't in the frame when they sold it, and the customer put 1,800 miles on the car, and that's when the hole in the frame developed. I don't think so.
Right.
Irrespective, now you've got a lawyer involved,
Mhm.
and you're going to have to resolve it with that lawyer,
Yeah.
or spend $20,000 a month arguing about it.
Right. Right.
Right.
Yeah. So I'll give you another example, and this is the most severe example that I was involved in my years in the dealerships. We had the state police walk into the dealership, and
Which
they
they
were
do often, which they do
Yes.
on and off often.
Yeah. So they were looking for information on a certain customer's vehicle history.
Right.
And so about a week prior, this vehicle had on the Interstate 90, the Mass Pike, had gone from the fast lane to the breakdown lane and struck the back of a trooper's Ford Explorer, killed the trooper, knocked the vehicle like 30 yards off the road into the median, blah, blah, blah. So they were looking for information on his car because the driver survived, and he said, my brakes failed. In the glove box, doing their inventory search of the car, they found the invoice from our dealership where he had been 2 days prior to this accident. So they're coming to talk to us.
Of course.
He says his brakes failed.
Right.
So now this is where the compliance and risk mitigation comes in. Because we had a strong process in place, in our records, we had a multi-point inspection. We used to print out 2 copies. One went to the customer. One we had the customer sign and stayed with his records. On his records was that multi-point inspection showing that his brakes were indeed in the red, but that he signed off. And on the repair order was a declined line for not doing the brake repair.
Right.
Still don't believe that his brakes actually failed. It was just, it needed pads. You know, it wasn't something that was going to make you go across 3 lanes of the highway.
Right.
But this went all the way to, I mean, he killed a trooper, right? So this wasn't going away.
Right.
It went to a trial. My 2 express advisors were subpoenaed into that trial.
Right.
And had we not had a good process, this could go a completely different way.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, you bring up, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say where maybe my express advisors face some sort of criminal fines. Maybe I do, or criminal charges. Maybe I do. Maybe the dealer does.
Right. Well, you bring up a great example of various policies that need to be in place at dealerships to avoid problems. Number one, if a trooper walks in, does everyone know what to do with them? Do you give him the information right there on the spot? Or do you tell him that you'll get it to him within 24 hours and then run to the dealer's office and say, how do you want me to handle this? Right. What is the dealership policy when a trooper walks in, which is really the same as the media, when when the local news media comes in and they want to film and get somebody, all that. So that's the first thing. The second thing is how the dealership handled the media if they found out about that. Is there a media policy in place? Pro tip, which I see this mistake a lot, is if you're going to submit a written statement, which I don't like doing, I think that's the wrong way to go. And I've handled plenty of media myself. If you're going to do that, don't submit it on your letterhead. Submit it on a white piece of paper that has the words, because they're going to use the camera and they're going to use that on air. You spend millions of dollars on your logo and your letterhead. Don't trash yourself by sending in that on your letterhead, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
So these are all, there's so many opportunities for risk mitigation when these situations happen. For example, did the dealer turn that over to their insurance company? How did the insurance company respond? What did the insurance company say? Did they say there was coverage? There wasn't coverage. How do you handle that, right? These are all risk problems that you have to coalesce around solutions.
Right. Yeah. A lot of nuances that happen there. And troopers or OSHA, I mean, I've heard countless stories of OSHA walking into a shop and somebody just escorting them through the middle of the shop. And it's like,
Right.
well, that was a bad idea.
Yeah.
Because you can have a brand new shop and OSHA's going to find something that's
Well,
going to cost you some money.
Don't forget about the labeled containers.
Yeah.
Right. And the extension cords, especially. They love extension cords.
Yeah. Well, or the open bag of Cheez-Its on the technician's toolbox that they're going to get a $10,000 fine for. That's not something that you want to do.
No, it is not something you want to do. It's true.
Well, Tom, this has been an awesome conversation. I think there's a lot of value for dealers out there to figure out some things that they should not be doing and some things that they should definitely get on the ball and be doing. I will link up everything into the show notes, but what's the best way for people to reach you?
Sure. Thanks, Dave. So my phone number is 757-434-7656. Or my website is Better Vantage Point, BETTER Vantage Point. And my email address is Tom K, as in Tom Kline, at bettervantagepoint.com.
Excellent. All right. We will make sure that's all linked up. And I encourage everybody to reach out to you to make sure they don't have problems that cost them a lot of cash that they didn't want to spend.
That's it.
Thank you again for joining us. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Dave. Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Take care.